Hello, everybody, and welcome to PGS Moving Image. I am your host, Mmmm, and tonight we have with us Catherine Cooke. Catherine, how are you?
Good.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. And for everybody who is watching, Catherine and I have seen Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, and we're here to talk all about it. Catherine, I have been so eager to see this film. And should we do the first part, maybe the first 15 minutes is a non-spoiler review, and then the
Yeah,
second half will be spoiler? Um,
sure.
okay, so that's what we're going to do, guys. In the first 15 minutes or so, it's going to be non-spoiler, and I'm just going to put that here, non-spoiler initially, okay? Non-spoiler for at first. So Catherine and I are going to be doing non-spoiler for Mission Impossible 7 review, guys. And I hope everybody out there as well. Hope everybody is doing great tonight. And so glad to see you all. So Catherine, I don't know about you, but when I heard this film was 2 hours and 43 minutes, I realized from the last Mission Impossible that I had seen, that Tom Cruise did, that this was going to be jam packed, and I have to say that this film was no exception. Certainly, there wasn't really any downtime, and to be honest with you, I was always intrigued by what was going to happen next. I could not predict anything in this film. I felt like this film really is a winner. It's a huge summer blockbuster film that we would normally be getting in a normal summer. I feel like Tom Cruise has hit this one out of the park. What do you think? What are your impressions of the film after having just come out of the theater, Catherine?
I thought the last four movies in the franchise were better. Um, I was really liking this movie for about the first hour or so. And then after that, it starts getting a bit too serious in tone, didn't feel as fun. And the cinematography I didn't think was nearly as good. Like watching, say, the helicopter chase in Fallout last night when I was rewatching it, the photography is amazing. Like wherever the CG might be in that scene, you just don't see it. It was gorgeous. This movie, with like the train sequence and certain moments in the car sequence, I mean, I know they did all of it for real, but maybe it's something about the way they shot it. It just looked a bit off. Like it didn't seem as real as it probably was, which kind of took me out of it. And some of the dialogue was a little clunky, like when they're talking about the entity and the way the entity presents itself can be a bit silly at times. I'm like, okay, but again, I was really on board with the beginning of the movie and what it was doing. I'm like, oh, here we go. This is going to be fun. Trying to tie things into Ethan's past. It's like, okay, so you're like trying to get the ball rolling, but it just as half a movie really, because it is basically half the story. I like the plot twist that happened in the film, but I kind of, when you go to a Mission Impossible movie, you love seeing stuff like as we had, like the bike jump that's there on our background, or like when he's hanging off the side of a plane in the beginning of the fifth one, or the helicopter chase in the sixth one. So watching this movie and a lot of the big action scenes just for some reason they didn't look as photoreal as they have in the other ones for me, and that kind of took me out of it. Because Mission Impossible, it's like, yeah, that's fine for a normal action movie, but Mission Impossible, it's like it raises the bar and sets the bar because they do stuff like this for real. But the key to make it is not just doing it for real, but it's got to look real too. Like so something about that kind of took me out of it. Their attempts at being emotional didn't land with me at all. And maybe it's because of certain characters they try and pick to be emotional with just doesn't work as well for me. But I really thought the beginning with the stuff in Abu Dhabi and early stuff in Italy was like really fun and really zippy. And I liked the concept of what they're trying to, of what the threat is, so to speak. I'm like, okay, I can kind of see where you're going with this. And some of the, the back and forth espionage stuff is kind of fun. But I just feel it's because of how deadly serious everybody's been. Like these movies are also really fun because everybody's kind of goofy and having a good time, especially Ethan's team. Like when you have Luther and you have Benji, and this one just didn't feel as fun. Like everybody was like deadly serious almost all the time, and that kind of took a lot of the fun factor out of it for me.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that. That is true, and this had a different tone to it. It was much more serious, um, and there were even things that prevented, let's say, the team from working with one another at certain times, which is something that I never thought I would see that in the film. But there were certain elements which we might discuss a little bit later. I don't want to spoil it, where the team could not work together. And I thought to myself, well, have they really trained for that? Like, what happens when somebody drops out? It's not a big team, you know, it's only a few people. And you know what happens when that kind of breaks down? So that was something that I almost wondered whether or not and of course this isn't true, or at least I don't think it's true, how far the characters were going to go in this film. And that made me question how that what direction that was going to go in. I did like the additional casting choices in the film. So you know, we have new members who are playing or who have come into the movie. And I'm trying to remember the lady's name. I think her name is and I can't remember the character's name or the lady's.
Grace.
Yes, Grace is the actress's name.
The actress Haley Atwell.
Yeah, she was fantastic in
Oh,
this.
yeah.
I thought, go ahead.
Yeah, I think she was a much needed infusion of somebody fun and charismatic who has good rapport with Ethan. I liked that she felt a bit out of her element. It's like not everybody in this franchise has to be super good at everything every job they're doing all the time. So I liked that she kind of, it's like, okay, she's a master thief, but then she finds she's really in over her head, and that made for an interesting dynamic. As opposed to Ilsa Faust, who's a character I found in the last few films to be very deadly serious all the time. And it's like, you can kind of loosen up a bit. You don't have to be. I like that Haley Atwell's character, Grace, is not as uptight. Like, she's really, okay, you kind of not really sure about her. It's like, where's her moral compass exactly? Is she only out for herself? Is she going to help the team? You're not really sure. And I like that about it because it keeps you guessing. And she just brought such a very effervescent in the role. I loved her.
She really was effervescent, and she had this she was incredibly confident, more confident than I think a lot of people would be in this situation, because she seemed to know a little bit more about what was going on. And she was willing to take certain risks that I don't know whether anybody else would do, but she wanted to be independent. And I kind of like the notion of somebody who is thinking, well, I can do this on my own and I don't really need anybody else. I really like that, because I think that's a more realistic picture. You're not going to necessarily trust a stranger. Like, why would you trust a stranger necessarily? There's no reason to. And even if they did help you out, you're going to go back to people that you know, whoever she knows. It's not going to be somebody you just met five minutes ago. Even if they do things for you, which I think they demonstrated pretty well in the movie, I think it does take time to gain trust for somebody new or for whatever is going on. I did like the settings, and it seemed like they were trying to show some romantic. You mentioned about emotional scenes, and it seemed like they were trying to go down some romantic pathways in this. And at least that's what I thought they were hinting at, Catherine. I'm not quite sure. It seemed like they were trying to bring, let's say, some characters together, which I'm also very surprised by, because I don't believe that either of them have shown an inkling of being really interested in one another that way. So in other words, you know, like all of a sudden you're in this incredibly romantic city. You go to, let's say you fly to Paris tomorrow, and it's like, yeah, of course it would be great if you were with someone, but it didn't feel like, even though they were in a very romantic place, that their feelings for each other were actually true. So I don't know if that's what you were alluding to before, but I certainly did kind of feel like, okay, that's nice. I guess it's just a friendly thing, but nobody wants to see a friendly moment between two people.
I think in the last movie it was, in Fallout, Luther has a scene where he tells Ilsa at one point that, you know, if you care about him, you should walk away. Mm-hmm. And it is in the last one, because Luther told Ilsa the story about why Ethan's not married anymore. Yes. And he's like, he cares about it. And so you could tell that when he's saying that, it's because they're trying to allude to the idea that maybe she and Ethan have something. And you could tell there's kind of something there, but because of the circumstances of them, the way they meet all the time, they haven't had a chance to really push that anywhere. So you're right. when you see people in like a romantic setting, it's like, oh, let's try and push it further and make it bigger than what it is so far. It's like, no, so far you guys have a lot of chemistry together, but you haven't really gone past even first base, even gotten to first base yet to be making the case. And then with other things that happen, it just, I mean, we'll get to it in the spoiler section, but yeah, it's like, okay, I felt like it's there because they were trying to tick a box, like, because these movies don't really tell you much about Ethan or his I mean, up until the third one where he's actually retired and married and gets coaxed back into it. And I admit I was always disappointed in the fourth one to find out that he didn't stay with Julie and that they kind of broke up because, oh, he's always going to have to save the world. It's like, well, that doesn't mean he has to be alone and depressed all the time in his downtime, you know? So yeah, it feels like that's why they try and shoehorn in the romantic stuff in this one, because they feel the need to, you know, tick that box of what, oh, action blockbusters, what do they need? Da 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 da.
Yeah, I agree. And also the you know, we've seen many people on the team grow as characters and grow in positions, and I thought one of the characters was still quite nervous in the execution of what would be considered an impossible mission, or the execution of anything. So I think that, you know, there's kind of a very interesting scene between he and Tom Cruise where, you know, he has to accomplish something and they're like, well, how are we going to do this? And, you know, it's even he's questioning. I'm like, at this point, he shouldn't be questioning anything. He's like, okay, here are the options and this is how it's going to happen. And I think that would have been somewhat more believable with, you know, perhaps the Cruise character then going ahead and responding to that. But at this point, there shouldn't be any doubts. Certainly in the Vin Raines character, I think he has remained an incredibly strong and a stoic person in the team, which he almost feels like the anchor. What do you think, Catherine?
Which one was that, Luther?
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Luther is definitely the anchor on the team. He's the one, he knows that Ethan, he can rein him in when he needs to, because I feel like he's the one person that Ethan's going to listen to other than himself. And you could tell they're really great friends going back a long time, all the way to the first. He's the only other character in this franchise who's been in every movie. You know, granted, his appearance in the fourth one was just a cameo at the end, but at least he was still there. And so, yeah, I like that Luther's kind of the more stable one in all the way through. But I also kind of wish that Luther could get a little more in on the action at times, because he's always like, you know, the guy in the chair doing on his computer or whatever, you know, and it's like the guy you call in because he's the brains. But I kind of always wanted him. I feel like him and Ethan would hit it off really well and bounce off each other really great as field agents. But, you know, I still love Luther. I've always loved the Luther character. He's my favorite aspect of the first movie.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, as you mentioned earlier, there is a very interesting plot twist in the beginning. And I'm going to go into more detail about it when we get into the spoiler section in about 10 minutes or so. But I did want to say that I liked the visuals, Catherine, in the beginning. You mentioned you liked the parts in Arabia. I liked some of the visuals that they had in the beginning where they were trying to explain what was going on. And it was eerily similar to something that had been in the news. Like I wasn't expecting that, but it reminded me of some classic films that I've seen about, let's say, I'm trying to say it correctly, but about the Navy, let's say. And I really enjoyed that nod to it. It had that level of intensity. And who doesn't like to see military people in missions like this? We got to see, and this is not necessarily a spoiler, but we got to see some other operators. You know, I enjoy seeing those guys in the film as well, because they have to respond to the team, which is supposed to be a secret. But Catherine, it seems like everybody seems to know about the team. Do they?
Yeah, it's like, you know, first they're trying to, you know, it's like the whole impression we've been getting of the IMF is that it's a total off the books type operation. But it seems in this movie that it's almost like an open secret. Even before the guy tells everybody about it, it's like, it feels like they already know. A lot of people already know about, like, there's the Shea Wiggum character, for instance, knows all about Ethan. And, you know, he kind of reminds me of the character from, you know, the Russian agent from the fourth movie who thinks Ethan's the bad guy and is tailing him the whole way. Except with Shea, he alludes that he knows Ethan and all about his life, but that it's not a personal thing. And it's like, well, then if you're not an IMF agent, then why do you really know everything about Ethan? Like, that's something that never really resolved, but it does feel like more people are kind of aware of Ethan in this film than in any of the others.
And do you think Ethan has grown in the sense of responsibility? Because it feels like he's wearing, and it is true that the situation with his wife is because he didn't necessarily want to put her in danger. And I get that. But do you think that he's grown in the sense of responsibility? I mean, it felt like in this film, he had the weight of the world on his shoulders now. Is he sharing that weight with the team, or is it something he feels he has to carry?
It feels a little old hat at this point. There's always a moment in these movies where he's like, "Oh, I got to take the responsibility. It's got to be me. You guys got to get out of here. It's only me." Or in the fifth one, where he's like, "Whatever's gonna happen is what Solomon Lane wants to happen. That's what's gonna happen. You have to trust me." And it's kind of more of the same at this point. He kind of does that in every movie. So it's like, I didn't really feel like the premise for this film is even, oh, you have to stop another dangerous weapon from getting into. It's like, that's the plot of all the Mission Impossible movies. And granted, you don't go to these movies for the plot. You go there for like the action and the stunts and all that type of stuff. So I didn't feel like the stakes were necessarily any higher in this movie than they have been in all the others. And I certainly don't think that they utilized the new technology in this movie in a unique or interesting, not as, like, they do some things that I thought were kind of obvious, so we'll get to this non-spoiler or in the spoiler section, but I hope in the next movie that it really gets to, rack it up a notch, because in the previous films it's more like the threat of a bomb or the threat of a bioweapon, in which case obviously it can't be unleashed, it can't happen, so they have to race to prevent it from happening. Whereas this is the first time they've taken something which you could demonstrate repeatedly. And so I just hope that they really embrace that more in the next one, because I felt it was a little limited in this.
Yeah, and this is the first time we've been in a position where I'm not going to say it's a cliffhanger, but we know there's a part 2. So, technically speaking, the situation isn't over. What do you think about them splitting it up into 2 films?
It's more bang for the buck. You save money shooting them back to back, and then, Tom Cruise is racing against his age at this point. They've said it's going to be a send-off for the character. And the pacing was done so well that, I checked my watch, and the movie itself, excluding credits, is 2 hours, 36 minutes long, but it flies by. Not exactly super fast, per se. It's not like zipping through, but it's very well, decently paced. And it felt like not that much happens in this movie. It does when you think about all the plot twists and stuff, but it does feel almost like I'm only halfway through the story. Like when the movie ends, pacing wise, it feels like there's a lot more left to go. And it's like, oh, we're here at the end, And so, yeah, I'm cool with it, splitting it into 2 films.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree with you. I understand the sense of the need for him to do that, especially in since time is an issue here. Now, before we go into the spoiler section, which we're going to do in a few minutes, is there anything else you want to say about the film before we start to spoil it, Catherine? I would recommend the film. I'd say anybody would enjoy this. It's going to be a fun ride. It's going to be fantastic. You're going to enjoy this. There's a lot to see in this film. You're not going to get bored at all. I definitely would recommend this film. I think it's going to make a lot of money. What do you think, Catherine?
Yeah, well, I like all the Mission Impossible movies. So just because I rank this one lower than a lot of the others doesn't mean I don't like it. I still liked it. But yeah, it'll probably do very well at the box office. I don't doubt that at all.
Okay. So with that being said, did I have oh, that's the wrong banner. That's why it said that. Okay, so I'm going to change the banner to spoiler. I just have to edit this for a second. And guys, for those of you out there who are watching, we talked about the film a little bit for the past 20 minutes or so. And that was non-spoiler, but now we are going to go into the spoiler version of this review, guys. So if you have not seen this film and you don't want to know what's going to happen, I advise you to check out, to leave this particular review right now. Catherine and I are going to be talking spoilers for Mission Impossible 7, which, I absolutely love this film, Catherine. And I did just want to say that, so we're doing spoilers now, and I felt like for some reason, the first part of this film reminded me of The Hunt for Red October. I don't know why, but it had that vibe. And I love seeing, groups of military in action. I thought it was very clever, this thing. Are they getting into way over their head with this entity element? And what did you believe that this entity could control as much as they claimed that it did? Do we actually even know what this entity can do?
Well, it's, the typical AI thing that you see in sci-fi where it becomes self-aware and immediately decides it has to get rid of humans and manipulate, take over the world or whatever. And so it's like, okay, what I couldn't figure out is, they sent the CIA director or whatever says later in the movie, we sent a copy of it to the submarine and we were meant to sabotage it, but for some reason it instead decided to trick them into firing a torpedo on itself, which was clever.
Yeah.
But I'm like, why would the entity want to strand itself, under the Arctic where it's like inaccessible unless you probably have millions upon millions of dollars worth of equipment to get it out? And it must have, and that's another thing, is the director says, he sent a copy of it to the submarine, and they make the point that the only way to shut it down is to get to the original source code. And they're like, oh, we have to get the submarine. It's like, well, if that's a copy, then doesn't that mean there's a original somewhere else? Like, I don't know if that was like a mistake in the script, or if maybe they're going to reveal, no, it's not actually on the submarine. That's just the copy. But yeah, it's doing the typical things. It messes around. The idea that it's so self-aware that it's able to follow every single person, like it's intelligent enough to not just read all the information of the file. It knows exactly who it needs to watch, when it needs to watch them, how to trick them by, changing facial recognition on security cameras or tracking their emails or imitating voices. And it's sort of like it could do everything to the point that, well, can it just randomly put a bounty out on Ethan for a bunch of mercenaries to just come out of the blue and just shoot him, which is exactly what the Jason Momoa character does in Fast X. He just takes all the money and hires all the mercenaries. Like, if the entity has the power to do all this other ridiculous stuff, then why doesn't it just do that and the problem solved? It's one of those things where you have to, it's plot armor. It's like, oh, it can do anything, which is why it's dangerous. We demonstrate how it's so fiercely intelligent that it's able to know exactly, again, who it needs to go after and when. But then it doesn't do these other things. It could create a traffic accident during the car chase if it wants to by changing the traffic signals and stuff. It could do. I feel that's why I feel in the next movie I want to see it do more. There have been other films which allude to AI type threats or hacking type threats. Like the fourth Die Hard movie did that in 2007. Oh, what if a virus takes control of everything? We've seen AI is like the new. I think it's going to be the new big thing that movies are going to rush into after. Time travel and multiverses that we've seen lately. So, yeah, it's a lot of plot armor with it, but it's like, okay, this is what they're going with. I'll just roll with it.
Well, some of the Arabia scenes reminded me, and forgive me for saying this, but it reminded me of the Nightmare Batman scenes. I don't know why, but I felt like I was brought back into that film where you have Nightmare Batman, and it was just so funny. So I couldn't stop thinking about that once I saw some of those scenes in this, in the peninsula. But, of course, there was Faust. There she was. She's everywhere, Catherine. Is this even realistic that she is everywhere, Catherine?
And not even for a Mission Impossible movie. It's like in the fifth one, in the sixth one, and here it's like she keeps It's like even in the fifth one, at the end of Rogue Nation, Ethan makes sure that Atlee, who started the syndicate, he makes sure that he admits that he framed Ilsa and that she's completely innocent. And Director Hunley hears it and the PM hears it. And so in the sixth movie, the idea that they're blackmailing her yet again after they've exonerated all this didn't. And plus her cover's blown enough with lines. Like, why do you want her to go after him? Why don't you send a whole hit squad after him or something? It didn't really. And how she's just able to show up everywhere. And they just did the same thing again. So it's almost like she's the. What do you call it? Like a Deus Ex Machina type character. Whenever you need a complication, we'll just throw Ilsa Faust in there to take care of it. It's like, I'm not really a fan. It doesn't. It's like at the rate that she's able to show up everywhere, it feels like Luther and Benji should also be. Like with Luther and Benji, it feels like when they need to catch up to Ethan, there's actually a concerted effort to do it. Ilsa Faust just kind of just shows up whenever the plot needs her there, even though it doesn't track. It's like, why exactly is she involved in this again? It's like, oh, okay, you're just. and she just writes it off as a simple line. Oh, we always get pulled back into these things, Ethan. It's like, so yeah.
And I liked that, from, let's say, as the observer of the film, what the key is for, what this key is for, what it does. And I've never really had a film where I immediately knew, oh, that's what it's for. It's for doing this. Who on earth in this organization thought they could control the entity? Who, like, for an entity that's supposed to be sentient, how could you control a sentient being? Is this a new thing, you think?
Well, I think the idea was that, like, when the director says they first sent the copy to the Russian sub because they were just going to sabotage it, and because it's a copy, apparently they didn't think, because they didn't know it was self-aware. But for some, again, for plot reasons, it becomes self-aware on the Russian submarine. And that's kind of interesting you bring that up, because they actually show us what the keys do in the opening scene in the movie. Like, nobody else knows, but we know what they do.
Yeah.
Which is like, why are they showing? Usually you have to discover things with Ethan or the team, but they actually told us in advance. And I admit I was kind of confused for a lot of the movie as to why is this thing on the same Russian submarine that it torpedoed? So, like, what's that about? And so when the director, Carrie Elway's character, explains later in the movie on the train, I'm like, oh, okay. But even then, like he said, it's a copy, and like Luther says, it's got to be the original source code to shut it down. I'm like, well, then the original one isn't on the submarine, is it? So I don't know, unless that's a glaring mistake by the script. That's got to come back at some point. But I think the thing is, they never expected it to become self-aware, and the keys were just it's sort of like a failsafe, like in GoldenEye. You need to turn both keys simultaneously to be able to use the GoldenEye satellite, and it was the same thing here. You need to put both halves of these keys. This cruciform key is in there to open it, but then you have to. They split. It's designed to be broken apart for security reasons. Like, I'll give you one half, and you could take the other. And it's just in order to access it, because even when it's not sentient, it's still dangerous technology that you wouldn't want to give to, like the director of the CIA says, oh, we could pair it with the military-industrial complex, the United States military, blah, blah. And so that was, so I could see why they thought they can control it, because they didn't think it was going to become sentient. But now that it is, they're all in a race to shut. And you're right, it is plot armor for them to think that, again, given all the things we see that the entity is able to do, then they shouldn't be able to pose a threat to it with the keys or not. Like, anything remote. Like, notice how the train in the climax is an old coal-powered train. It's not on an electric line. If it was, they'd be in trouble. But then you have other things that are inconsistent, like when Benji decides to trust the self-driving computer car, and he looks at the steering wheel for a second, and he buckles his seatbelt like he's worried. It's like, again, the entity's tracking you and everything you're doing. Like, yeah, they're using analog at that point. But like the villain of the movie says, I know that you were going to come to the Orient Express because the entity has already configured all the possible outcomes. And given it knows the type of person you are, this is where we're going to end up. Well, by extension, he should know that Benji and Luther are going to be there, whether they could track him or not. So it's like, again, there's a lot of plot armor with how the logic of this tech, the tech can do whatever the needs of the plot need it to do. And same with its limitations, or whatever the limitations the script needs to put on it at any given time.
And it is very funny that they chose at a certain time to apply that when there's an airport scene where the team decides to F with the operators and identify everybody, and of course they think it's that person in disguise, and it's totally wrong person they're identifying with. But then we get that interesting scene, that I was kind of alluding to, where the team was actually cut off and not able to do their job. And that was very exciting for me. But then I thought to myself, well, what's their plan B? What do they do in that event? Like, what happens if the equipment doesn't work? We've seen a few times where those facial masks don't work.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, there are other times where stuff gets broken, or you can't use it, or you have to reevaluate the situation. But they seemed pretty much in the dark, Catherine. Were you surprised at how freaked out they were, knowing that it's a sentient being that might be able to do something like this?
Yeah, because Luther makes the point that we're going to have to go analog at some point. And that scene you're talking about, when they realize that it's watching them, they not only close their computers, they destroy them. Because it's like, we can't let it keep tracking us. And because they have a general idea of where Ethan was, they were able to take off on the boat to go find him. But to that point as well, in that airport scene you're talking about, where it's kind of the entity is messing with them by changing the faces, The fact that the Shea Wiggum character even knows to check the face to make sure they're not wearing a mask. Again, if other CIA regular rank and file people are aware of the IMF's tactics now with masks and stuff like that, then shouldn't this be commonplace? Like in the scene when Kittredge is sitting down with, Grace on the train and she's disguised as, the other dealers. Like the minute she starts acting weird and asking for all these concessions for the Grace character, he should immediately have known. Like, why would you care about Grace? Oh, aha. Yeah, that's another plot armor thing. It's like he would know that. He's been there from the very beginning. Because I like that they brought him back from the first movie, but he knows how the IMF works. He should have seen. He knew Ethan was out there and was going to be a potential problem. And he knows obviously he knows Ethan's resume and everything he's done and how he's done it. So it's like the idea that he wasn't smart enough to snuff that out. It's like, come on,
Well, yeah, and that is a very good point. And now the operators who end up kind of chasing, who are activated, these operators who are activated for this mission, whatever their mission is, he had a clear shot at Ethan. It's clear, like he literally looked him in the face, pointed a gun towards him, and that could have been a very bad situation, but he doesn't do anything. What were they really there for, do you think?
Well, you're talking about the Shea Wiggum character, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think it goes back to his first scene in the movie when they get the mission that they have to detain, they got to catch Ethan, and his partner, Dega, asks him, well, do you know this guy, Ethan? And he says, not personally, and Dega's like, but it's personal, and he doesn't respond. So there's something there, and they haven't told us what it is yet, so I take it that it will come back in the next movie, because even in the climax, like you're right, he has him dead to rights. He could finish the mission right there. He doesn't even have to kill Ethan. He could just injure him or something, but he doesn't do it because whatever this like on the one hand, he has an axe to grind of some kind. We don't know exactly what it is, but he also knows that. He also knows that he can trust him because he knows his whole resume up to a point. Because again, his partner keeps bugging him throughout the movie. He's like, "But sir, what if Ethan does this stuff for the right reasons?" And he kind of brushes him off, like he doesn't want to talk about it. So there's some history there, and I'll be eager to hear what it is come the next movie, because you can't just leave that lying around. Because his partner is a much more ethical person. When he says, "Well, what would you do if you had the keys?" Like, "Well, I'd give it to my superiors. It's too powerful to have for any one person to have." He's like, "Really, you would do that?" It's like, well, wouldn't everybody be on that side? And that's admittedly a naive thing to say. There's a lot of bad people in the world who would want that for their own ends.
Well, yeah, and it's something to think about. And Catherine, I love the part where they did get into the smaller car. I know you were talking about it or maybe you didn't talk about it, but there's a part where they end up, the car chase. And I wanted to get into that car with Tom Cruise. Like I wanted to be in this car chase. She ends up getting a handcuff to him, which is very funny. But I really enjoyed that car chase and everything that happened with it. And that kind of felt more on the order of what I was expecting to happen. What did you think of it?
I thought that was a really fun sequence, especially when there's a moment in the chase where the car kind of tumbles down and they find themselves sitting on opposite sides and looking at their handcuffs like, how did that happen? And that's really funny. And then for some reason she keeps doing like the donuts around the fountain and she's not turning anywhere, and that's the same place that they had that other stunt in Fast X a few months ago, except that was real CG, but here they do stuff for real, so it looked really cool. But that was, again, that whole action scene just had the fun of Mission Impossible. But from the end of that scene on, the rest of the movie, that's where I felt the tonal shift, where it just gets way too serious with itself, and it didn't, and the fun factor kind of got sucked out a bit for me after that. But I love that. I love the whole movie up until that point.
It was so good. And I was going to say it had a little tone of the Italian Job to me, with the tiny little cars. And of course you see them all over there. When you go over there, they're everywhere. So they're readily available. And I do like how he used it to his advantage. And there's even a part where he drives backwards, and it's exactly like what we would expect him to do. He knew what to do. He knew how to adapt to this. And this is what we're kind of expecting. And I also think that Grace's kind of like, I'm going to say, ability to adapt to that situation worked out well. She asked questions. Well, what do I do? I can't, she gave him sort of like, he doesn't know her. And then she gave him cues so that he would know what to expect. And she said, I
Yep.
can't do this, or I don't know how to do that. And he's like, okay, well, I don't know how to do that. Okay, then do this. And I thought that showed their communication between the two of them is more than it probably is even more than just verbal. I think that they had communication from the second they saw one another, or let's say when he had eyes on her and he knew that she was the thief. I think that he knew exactly how to relate to her, which is something maybe they have the best chemistry. I don't know yet. I mean, let's see what happens in the next film. But ironically, at a point where you would expect them to have super hot chemistry, and I'm not saying that anything has to happen, but it kind of felt like they were getting very close. Am I wrong, Catherine? I mean, did you not feel the chemistry?
Well, I thought they had a much more natural chemistry than he ever did with Ilsa. And that, again, that playful chemistry that they have, that back and forth at the airport, is completely absent in the second half of the film, because she's like getting where everybody's getting where. So maybe something will come of it in the next one. I don't know, but I did. That's again part of the fun of these movies, which I thought the first half had a lot of.
I had attested let's say the second half, that section is really kind of Grace's story, because now she's totally changed her life. She's becoming supposedly part of the team. Grace did not wake up that morning thinking that was going to happen. She, in fact, after the car chase scene, she ran off. Like, she was like, I get the hell away from these crazy people. I don't want to have anything to do with these people. She pretty much was, I think that's pretty much what she had decided. I don't want to have anything to do with these people. These people are crazy. I didn't sign up for this. So I kind of think, it's like, I guess her origin story of how she ends up on the team. And of course, Faust doesn't make it, but I was not comfortable with it. I mean, I know they're friends, but I wasn't necessarily that comfortable when she was like, well, I've never been to Venice before. And he's like, I've never been to Venice. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Like, what are you guys trying to do here? I guess, was she trying to say goodbye to him? Is that how they wanted us to say, well, they're very tight, but this is the last time you're going to see her? I mean, what do you think?
Ilsa, you mean?
Yes, I'm so sorry.
Oh yeah, yes.
Yes, her last name is
right.
So
yeah, she I can kind of feel that, because again, you can only bring a character back in a convenient situation so many times before it's over, and that's what I was referring to, and the emotional thing that didn't land with me. They're trying to make you feel like her death's a big deal. It's like, well, when you have the villain literally say that one of these two people is going to die, they're going to die here, they're going to die at this time, and because the machine, the entity, and the silliness of the entity being at the party, and it's like, oh God, okay. And then following up almost verbatim, it's like, I get that you want to demonstrate that the villain and the entity are correct, but I just didn't feel anything. And part of that to me is because I always thought the Ilsa character was very cold and calculating in all 3 movies she's appeared in. Like, she didn't ever have that playful chemistry with, like, professional chemistry with Ethan, but not, she didn't have that instant fun, playful type stuff that him and Grace had at the airport. And so it's like, and you're right, the stuff where they're talking in Venice, and yeah, like I mentioned, they teased it in Fallout, like there might be something there, but they've never just had the opportunity to push it further. And so it's like again, they're telegraphing like crazy that she's going to be the one who's going to die, because you knew when you're going into the last 2 movies of the Ethan Hunt part of this franchise that somebody's got to bite it. But I thought it was also the safe choice to kill somebody who's a supporting character of only these previous 2 films. As opposed to maybe going after maybe Benji or something. And so, yeah, again, her death, I didn't feel anything from that. And so, yeah, they're trying to make it feel romantic, like he's had a loss. But I didn't feel nearly as much as I did when you have the big surprise at the end of Fallout, when they're like, why are we going to this village in Kashmir where the smallpox is? And you see Julie's there, and it's like, oh, shit. That's like that was really great. But I just didn't feel anything for the Ilsa character.
Yeah, I think to be honest with you, I think it's a chemistry situation, and it's okay. Like, it's not every actor and actress are going to have chemistry. It doesn't work like that. But I think as soon as they realize that, the way that her character was portrayed, and that she might be just maybe so professional that she's not going to go down that road, then don't force well, I've never been to Venice before. It's like, excuse me, that's not you. You should be going in the corner cleaning your gun somewhere. You're not interested in like making attachments with anybody because you've never shown that interest before. So that was kind of weird. But so we do get another incredible scene with a stunt. And this is maybe a stunt that I thought maybe you were referring to, or you question. And I question, as I said, I question the character for saying like, well, I don't know how to handle this. And I'm thinking to myself, well, this is like, you know, Benji's, what mission is this? This is probably like his 10th or 20th mission. He's not going to say that. He's going to say, oh, by the way, this one's going to be a Hail Mary for you, or whatever it was. Just tell him the truth. It's like, you know, but then to see him kind of like, oh, I had the setting on landscape instead of the other one. I don't believe that, Catherine. What do you think?
Yeah, that was like, he had that moment in Fallout where he's like, turn right. It's like, are you sure you want to turn right? Oh, sorry, I had it on screen lock. You got to turn left. And him, like, it's not believable that he would still be a field agent with all the mistakes that he makes. And you're right, he would, at this point in their career, tell Ethan straight up, this is going to be Hail Mary. You're going to go off the cliff with the parachute. Because plus Ethan brought the parachute. And because initially he was planning to use it to leave the train. That's why when he opens the bag at the end and sees that Luther packed a second one, which is why he's like, oh, thank you, Luther. But you're right. Benji would, yeah, he'd tell him straight up, this is a Hail Mary and we have to do this. And even I admit at the airport where they're, you know, where they think that they're trying to defuse a nuke and like, oh, we don't need to tell Ethan about this. I'm like, really? It's like, that's obviously, because if the nuke goes off, it kills everybody and it destroys the key. So maybe you should tell him about it.
Yeah, it was kind of a little silly. They didn't have to do that. And they could have done something else with it. That could have been a point where the entity was kind of effing with him and saying, you know, I can't find you on the map. What's wrong? Is everything loaded? Yeah, I did everything according to how we do it.
Yeah, but that's another great thing is that the entity was smart enough to plant a decoy in the form of the bomb by telling the villain, plant this decoy. It's specifically addressed to Benji to keep Luther and Benji occupied so that way he could sabotage Ethan's part of the mission. And I get that Luther's going analog for the climax, but before Luther makes that decision, the villain is at the party and he says, well, the entity, you're going to be on the Orient Express. This is what's going to happen. Meaning that if it's already planned ahead before Luther has gone analog, then it should know that in part of its calculations that Luther is going to have learned and gone analog and should have had a plan in place to keep Luther and Benji occupied like it did at the airport. Again, in logical inconsistency with the apparently omniscient, omnipotent computer AI.
So what did you think of the Hail Mary parachute jump onto the train? As clever as it was, should they have had, and I'm not saying that they didn't consider this or we haven't already seen this a million times, but should they have just had him land in like one of the cars that had coal? Because we know there was one because we saw one of the characters crawling on a car that had coal. Should we have seen that versus him bumping into somebody just at the nick of time?
Right, because it didn't make sense that he would be horizontal like that flying through the window. It's like, no, because the parachute, it's like I get that, like he says, he's not as high in the air, which means the parachute, he's not going to slow down enough. But how are you going to be able, with the parachute the way it is, jerk yourself completely horizontally to break through the window of the speeding train? And you'd have to be going the same speed of the train at that instance. Otherwise, the minute you hit the window, it's going to speed by and you're going to get sheared in half. Your legs are going to get cut. It's like, again, it's plot armor and it's a bit that didn't feel... Same with the beginning of the stunt. They replaced the ramp digitally with the rock promontory, which, again, looked fake to me. But then you have the great base jump sequence. I'm like, this looks really great. But then they end it on a digital note with him, smashing through this window, which didn't, again, seem that real. But same with the train going off the cliff. It's like, okay, maybe you could have, like Back to the Future 3 did this with miniatures, and it looked real and it looked awesome when they plunged the train off. Like this, it was obvious that the engine and the locomotive and the coal car were just digital entities flying into the ravine, or at least that's what it looked like. Supposedly they did blow up the bridge for real, which is why it goes back to my complaint that something about the cinematography just looked a little off. I don't know, it just didn't have that rich photorealness that the climax of Fallout had, let's say, or most of the Fallout movie on the whole. Like this one, like that whole train sequence just, and I know they got on top of the train and did stuff for real, but every time they had to duck to avoid those the girders flying by, it didn't look like they were actually going underneath it. Same when they were in the tunnel. It again was a bit too CG for me. So, and that's not a problem in a normal action movie. But again, Mission Impossible raises the bar, and that's kind of what you expect. And when it starts doing stuff like that, it kind of takes me out of it. especially when the action scenes in the first half of the movie looked very real.
That opening scene in the, I guess it's a C-180 or 140 or whatever airplane that was, I enjoyed that so much. It looked fantastic. And then of course he held onto the payload,
Right.
Which made sense because it has a parachute. So that totally made sense. And the hesitance of the soldier also makes sense because he's not expecting anybody to hop onto the plane and be in the like that's the last thing he was expecting. So it caught him off guard and he didn't know how to respond to that. Made total sense. Was not shocked by any of that. And I enjoyed that, and I think that when it comes to this entity character, this character in the story, which actually is changing, dramatically changing things, the only hint or sense that we get about the entity's sentience is Luther talking about how the entity thinks and trying to use logic as to why the entity has a desire for a certain outcome. And I don't even think I completely understand why the entity has a desire as a certain outcome. But what I do know is that whatever outcome the entity wants, so far it hasn't. Let's say, according to Luther, it was supposed to be that Gabe would be killed, and I don't remember the second one. What was the Luther said? I know I wrote it down, but the point that I'm making is, how accurate do you think that is? It says, oh yes, the entity is scared of Hunt, and because he knows that Hunt wants to kill it. So
yeah, which is why it made sure to tell the Gabriel character to kill somebody close to Hunt. Which again, it shows that the entity is even manipulating the villain. Like the villain was being really cocky at the party. Oh, this is all going to happen, blah, blah, blah. But he doesn't realize that the reason the entity tells him that this is the only way is because the entity, on the one hand, it's using Gabriel to get the key back. But on the flip side, it wants to kill Gabriel before, exploit Ethan's personal disdain for Gabriel before he could find out where the entity actually is. Problem with this, so let's say he brings the key, he doesn't, let's say Ethan killed Gabriel. Okay. Well, that means Ethan would have the key. It's like, if the entity still wanted him on the train and wanted Ethan to kill him on the train, what does the entity want to become? It's not like the entity can use the key. Like somebody would still physically have to put it into the lock. So what, did it want the key to be destroyed on the train then? Did it? Because again, it's not going to want Ethan to come to the submarine and unlock it and have access. Because again, he's going to kill it, like Luther said. So so that's the thing. It's like, what was the entity planning on doing with the key if its plan to get Ethan to kill Gabriel had worked? And again, it goes back to the plot armor where it's like they're not really thinking some of this stuff through. Now, I could buy that Luther would be smart enough to know that it would want to kill Ethan because, given that it has access to all your files, it's read your CIA files, and knows you go rogue all the time for the right to get these positive outcomes, and that your government handlers are the ones who are always screwing things up. And it knows from like what the CIA director said that they all have their own plans for how they want to use this thing. So it would know. I found it believable that the entity would know that Ethan is a threat. Like we have to deal with Ethan and deal with that. But again, did it want to destroy the key because it physically can't use it? Did it want or maybe that was a failsafe. It's like, the failsafe is Ethan might kill Gabriel, or maybe it just wanted Gabriel to jump off the train like he does with the key and bring the key to him. But even if he does, again, so what if you have the key? It's an AI. It can't use the key by itself. It's like, it doesn't. And I don't think an action movie of this type of summer popcorn fare thinks that deeply about these types of things.
No.
Which is why there's so much plot armor in this movie, more than in any of the other Mission Impossible films.
I don't think it's necessarily going to like discourage anybody who's like, this is killing it for me. No, it's not going to. However, does the key actually work? Because I thought in the beginning they tried to use the key and it didn't. I mean, am I wrong?
They're using it because it wasn't really clear what they were activating the machine for. Because it's like when the director says later in the movie, we were trying to sabotage it. It's like, okay, you wanted to sabotage it to accidentally reveal itself through its stealth. Okay, so the idea was that you wanted them to activate it, and the AI was supposed to sabotage the stealth signal so that way they could see it on radar. Okay, cool. And the way that was going to do that was get them to fire a torpedo, which would not be stealth, so they could see it. And that's how they would find the submarine, by triangulating the direction the torpedo came from, how fast it was going, and that kind of thing. But what were the Russians on the submarine trying to use it for when they were Like, they never explain what was their aim of putting the key in and activating it. It's like, I'm not really clear about that.
Yeah. And I think that although we know that there's a key and all this stuff, perhaps we were told the function was one thing, but maybe the function is something else. So I'm sure they'll explain it at some point, because very rarely have I seen a situation where they don't explain it, but I'm curious.
Yeah, plus they never really said what the villain wants to do with the entity. It's like he recognizes its power and he's being manipulated by it, but what does he himself want to do with it? Because like when they tell the backstory of how he basically framed Ethan for murder, and that's how Ethan joined the, it's like that raises more questions than answers. It's like, well, what skills, like what were you doing before you got framed for murder that the CIA recognized that you could be a good agent? Like, why exactly did this guy show up and frame you for murder? It's like there's too many questions and no answers.
Yeah, it is something to think about. And, you know, as I said, I think there are some very interesting, the other notion where you had said about it being a copy, and then it's like, well, then if that's a copy, where's the original? It's something to think about. But yeah, it is a little confusing, and I guess they'll explain it to us. But is there more, Catherine, to the Grace character than we know?
I'm not sure, because she seemed pretty out of her element once. Like, she was there because, you know, she's a grifter and a thief. She's not one for physical confrontation. She seemed genuinely worried multiple times. Like, you could tell she's really freaked out during the car chase. Like, that's not her forte. And she was really nervous about having to go into the field until Benji and Luther tell her that, well, your options are prison, death, or do this. And she does get her, and there is self-preservation there, but they do show that she does ultimately have a bit of a moral compass when she declines the money. I mean, it'd be one thing if that money was coming from, say, the White Widow, then yeah, absolutely accept the money to deprive her of $100 million. But, and even though Kittredge was a bit corrupt too, she wasn't going to take the money from the government because she didn't really feel good about it. Like she says, I feel I'd be selling something other than the key. And then, of course, she swipes the key from him a second later because she gets a, it's like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe Ethan's right. Maybe nobody should have this. Granted, she could have just accepted the money and swiped the key anyway. But I guess by declining it, that ensures that Kittredge, because Kittredge would probably be able to trace it at that point because he did dump it in there, but or give her the money. But so it's good that she kind of comes around to it. But I'm not sure so far if there's more to her character up to this point. I think she just kind of found herself getting caught up in it because she was the chosen hire at the beginning of the film. So I think they'll hit it off, though, much more in the second movie. And I have a feeling that the next movie might have a time jump or something, because if she's going to be initiated into the IMF, yeah, obviously they're not going to make her a field agent. She's still freaking out about everything. And Ethan is kind of he knows it's a submarine, and he's going to have to do his research to find out where it is and how exactly he's going to get to it. So
now, fortunately, that poor girl who died, who helped them in the end, and I don't even know what is her name. Her name is
actress's name.
It's not Paris.
Oh yeah, they refer to her as Paris, but I'm not sure if that's her name or not. But
yeah.
Played by Palm Clementif. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but I liked her character. I thought she was really fun, and I thought that the way her character ends up is almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy the villain made. You're going to betray me. And so he does that. And it's like, well, you turning on her in that instance, which kind of came out of nowhere, is precisely why she helps him, which makes me think that maybe the entity wanted her to save Ethan. Like, it's one of the scenarios. Like, it's still manipulating or using Ethan to some ends, because it probably calculated a scenario where Ethan's going to end up with the key and Gabriel's going to have nothing. But then again, it's like, I would think it would want Gabriel to have the key, and she could have been a good asset to ensuring that Gabriel ended up with the key and Ethan could have died. So the idea that the entity told him to do something which, in a sense, stacks the deck against the entity makes me think that the entity came upon some new information, which is like, oh, maybe it's not a good idea to kill Ethan at this point. We don't know. It just seemed like a very weird contradiction. Like, oh, we gotta kill I gotta kill Ethan because otherwise he's gonna shut me down. Oh, she'll be great to do it. Oh no, we got to get rid of her now. It's like, and save Ethan. Like,
and it is kind of a good point that we don't know how. Let's say we don't know if Ethan has had any contact with the entity, direct contact. In fact, I don't know. I don't know whether we know anyone who's had direct contact with the entity. It could be something very different from what it's perceived to be, which is something that I'm thinking about. Sometimes characters can look like bad guys, and in the end, they may not be bad guys, which is something that I think would be interesting if the entity turned out to be just a being that they're manipulating and not a bad guy, just wants to get out of this. Maybe it's trapped or whatever. So I think there's a little bit more to this entity. I don't think the entity is necessarily free and can do whatever it wants to do. Maybe it needs something, and whatever copy of it that's under the sea, so to speak, has what it needs. But there's got to be more to this entity, Catherine. I just don't believe that that's the full story of the entity. It feels like there's so much more.
Again, given everything it's already able to infiltrate, like they mentioned at the beginning, it's infiltrated nearly every intelligence network across the world, and that's why they had to shut down and go analog with the only analog system they didn't give away to the National Weather Service. But well, then why doesn't it just hack nuclear launch codes or hack ICBMs and stuff like that, and it won't matter if anybody has the key at that point because you'd be wreaking so much havoc. So it's like, again, it's plot armor after plot armor after plot armor.
Yeah, and I think that if the entity thinks that let's say whatever humans believe it to be a commodity versus something that's worthwhile saving, its response to humans can be very different. So this could go so many ways. But I have to say, I agree with pretty much everything you've said. I enjoyed this film tremendously. I think that it was entertaining for me, even though that there was a tonal shift. I think Tom Cruise looked great in this film. I think he certainly was in top form, top condition. I know I'm just going to share the Rotten Tomatoes, and I don't even know how many people are really beyond Rotten Tomatoes now, because it feels like there shouldn't be enough, right? Maybe a couple of thousand people who are, or maybe more than that, who've seen it. Here they're saying that it's like a 90. Oh, it's 1,284. It's very little who've actually written in. Am I sharing it? I'm not sharing. It's not.
Yeah, I can see it.
Oh, it's at the bottom. Okay,
yeah.
And I'm sorry about that, guys.
Yeah, 96% critic rating and 95% audience rating.
Yeah, so there is that. I mean, it's and I could change it so that it's bigger. I've forgotten that I could put another view. Does this change? I don't want to do that one where you and I are both on here. Oh, here's the one I was looking for.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, we can kind of see that, and it's only a couple hundred people. But Catherine, I can't imagine the score is going to change dramatically. I think people are going to watch this film and they're going to love it. There's no message in this film. It was, a lot of fun sequences, and like we said, even though there are some that might be a little unbelievable, Tom Cruise looks amazing in this film. I think he's taken chances in the film. He decided, the cast was amazing. You had Indira Varmi, who I didn't know was in the film, in it. I'm a huge fan of hers. I also think I'm trying to figure out the operators and what their role is. I think that's maybe they're the ones who I'm the least confident in, that, maybe they have his back. Who knows? Maybe they want the key. But to be honest with you, I can't figure out what these guys are doing there. But I think the introduction of the Grace character might be the strongest thing in here. And, personally, what did you think of Isai Morales' character overall?
Again, there's too much mystery. Like, why did he frame Ethan for murder? What was that about? What exactly does he want out of the entity? Some of his dialogue is really clunky, like when he's talking at the nightclub about how, oh, everything's gonna happen, this is it, and he always acts. I'm thinking, I was kind of waiting for Ethan to just call him on his bullshit. It's like, just stop and try and do something rather than just letting him run the show. So maybe we'll get. He was okay as a character, so maybe they'll shed some more light on him in the next one.
Yeah, I have to wonder myself, and I just wanted to look at a few photos here of the film. If I could pull them up, let's see if it works. pull them up. Yeah, here's some just some shots from, I guess this was when they were in Venice, and they're kind of figuring out how they're going to manipulate the situation so they can get that key to go forward. And here's another shot. There's one of the car parts where she was very hesitant to even have anything to do with him. I think at this point she kind of is like, stay away from me. And there's actually a few scenes in the film where she runs away from him or tells people there's something wrong and she doesn't want to be around him. And I kind of thought that was very funny. Here's some more shots of the stars. So I'll just stop sharing that. But I thought they would have a little bit more. But overall, Catherine, I feel like this, I would go and see this again. Now, you mentioned you actually are going to go see this film again.
Yeah, I have IMAX tickets. And then I might see it in a regular theater with another friend on another day. So,
yeah, for those of you who are watching this this review, I would recommend this film to anybody. You're not going to be disappointed in this film. It's just, there's too much in it. It certainly does deliver action scenes like what we know from Mission Impossible, although perhaps not all of them are perfect. You know, there's a new entity or character in there that we are still trying to figure out.
A new entity called the Entity.
Yeah, that was really funny that they decided to keep it that way. But I guess maybe they couldn't come up with a name for it for a particular reason, Catherine. There must be a reason why it doesn't have a name. I hope.
I also feel that given, you have that massive room where everybody's trying to type all the information to get it on paper rather than on digital, because the truth is going to be corrupt. And they kept talking about how it manipulates the truth, and it's like, sure, it does that with the facial recognition and with the voices on the radio, but I'm like, I feel that if it's already been doing this to the point that they're copying things furiously, that there should be more chaos going on in the world right now, just with what it's done, so far already. So, it kind of reminds me of Ultron from Avengers, where it's like, oh, he can do anything. He can infiltrate the entire, computer networks, but he's only going after nuclear launch codes. And it's like, there's a bunch of other things you could do to create havoc as a diversion before you get to that. And it's like, so I feel the Entity can do a lot more, or should be shown to be doing a lot more and causing a lot more, wreaking a lot more havoc, given how serious the situation seems to be at the start of the film.
Well, as I said, I'm actually thinking that the Entity isn't what they're claiming it to be. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Entity ended up being someone controlling something like like an Oz style, an Oz style character who's actually controlling all this. Who knows?
That would be pretty cool, actually, because that would solve a lot of the plot armor issues.
It would make sense, and it would have to be like some kind of genius or mastermind. It could be like a Professor X situation, where he's kind of controlling this machine, and only someone who has that strength can do that. And it has to be somebody who knows what they're doing. It can't sort of like be somebody who's winging it. This would be their life's work. They took his life work, and they're going to use whatever analytical machine that he created. It wasn't intended for this purpose. I don't know. But of course, here's Grace and Hunt together. Certainly they shined like shiny, bright stars, Catherine, in this. I think she revitalized a lot of what was going on in this. And I think that it was nice to see, the Hunt character have to figure out what to do when he's handcuffed to her. It was just, that was really enjoyable. And I think it was a sign that they're not going to be able to sort of, how do I say, operate outside of each other's spheres. At least that's how I interpreted that. So for me, I would give this film probably an 8.5. It's 2 hours and 43 minutes, Catherine. And I did not feel bored in this film once. It made me even think about, like, how on earth are they going to what the hell are they going to do? So I have to give them credit for trying to figure this out. I don't know how long the next film is going to be. I know it's next year, so that's coming up. I would watch this movie again and again and again. What about you, Catherine?
I give it a 7 out of 10. Yeah, so it's still, the way I rank them so far, I'd put it down to probably towards my fifth. I'd put Rogue Nation, Fallout, Ghost Protocol, and MI3 ahead of this one. But yeah, yeah, 7 out of 10. That's fair. So I'll see it again. I know I'm seeing it again because I got the IMAX. So.
But that is very interesting, is that, and I think it's also very true for most of us. It's like, if you did actually like the film, which you and I both obviously like this film a lot, even though it's not a perfect 10, it's still watchable. It's fun to watch. I think it does say a lot about a film when it can deliver, even if it's not 100%, it's still delivering an entertaining time. And I think even this shot here, whoever took this publicity shot deserves an A+ on my book. Does kind of like grab the excitement and the, like they're looking at people who are pursuing them. It was exciting to watch in those elements. And do you think they could have pared down this film to 2 hours, Catherine, and it would have been a better film?
No, I don't think the runtime was the issue for me. It was just the glaring tonal shift and the sheer amount of plot armor and the artificial CG look of a lot of the action scenes in the second half for me.
Mm-hmm. Clearly, they wanted them to have this kind of climactic moment at the end on the train, and in addition to the let's say the tracks blowing up, they wanted these two characters to have very unusual moments on the train. But they get saved by one of the characters. I think it's the character whose name is very unusual. What is her name? Her name is Palm. Paris is her name.
Yeah, she saves him.
What did you make of that?
Well, again, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy thing where for illogical reasons, the entity wants her to save Ethan for whatever reason. Why, we don't know, because again, the entity supposedly wants to kill Ethan, and wants Ethan to kill Gabriel first so he doesn't know where it is, and then kill Ethan. So the idea that, oh, I need you to tell her, I need Gabriel, I need you to tell Paris that you will betray me and attack her, and it's only because you attacked her that she betrayed you. So of course she's gonna, unless the idea is that, I mean, because he did stab her in the stomach in that train car. So unless the entity thought she was going to die there, like maybe it was a situation where the entity saw a possible outcome where she would, because it meant she asked Ethan, "Why did you save me?" at a moment earlier. So maybe the entity merely thought that, she's possibly unreliable at this point and is expendable, and didn't think that she was going to survive that knife wound. So maybe that's the more logical answer to that particular scenario. But it was ultimately kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Well, it's certainly a lot to talk about in this film, Catherine, and you and I have talked for about an hour on it, but I'm sure there will be many more things, let's say, over the next few weeks as you and I do go ahead and continue to see this film again and again, because I'm going to watch it again. I'm watching this film again. It was too much fun, and I think that, as I said, I feel like Tom Cruise really did such a fantastic job with this film. It did feel fresh to me. So I also have to say that in regards to the challenge. So any final thoughts, Catherine, on this film?
No, not really. I think we covered it. But I look forward to seeing part 2 and then being able to watch them as one movie and seeing how it feels different.
I completely agree with you on that. Catherine, where can people find you? You
can find me on the Fantasmagorium Show YouTube channel. We got a lot of fun playlists there, reviewing movies and the like. Find me, Sly Snide, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, rather. And you can find me on the Unifying Force every second and fourth Sunday of the month, live streaming on the Virtual Cantina Network YouTube channel at 8 a.m. Pacific. So, yeah.
All right, fantastic. And Catherine, thank you so much for joining me for this review. And of course, you and I are going to continue to do more reviews together. You've got another episode of Cat's Corner coming up soon, guys. So please make sure that you're around for that. And as well as a review of The Thing coming up with Cameron Pasha that Catherine will be here for as well. So guys, please make sure you do check that out. And guys, please subscribe to Positive Fandom, my YouTube channel, where I do all the parlay in the fandom. It's such a pleasure to bring shows like this to you all, and so much fun for you all to be here and hear our thoughts about this incredible film. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson, my moderator, collaborator, and good friend. We are all goof people, guys. Certainly do appreciate Tom Jr. Jackson being there as always. Thank you, Tom. And guys, thank you for being here on the Burnettwork. I hope you like and subscribe here to the Burnettwork as well. And everybody, remember, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always remember to please be kind. Take care, everybody.